Why didn't American diseases kill Europeans? Diseases that killed historically. This may be a weird question, but I got to thinking about it yesterday. I have always read about the tens of thousands of Native Americans killed by unfamiliar diseases introduced by Europeans coming to North America. However, I have never heard of a disease that was native to the Americas killing massive amounts of Europeans. Why? They did, just to a much lower degree, because Europeans had had contact with pretty much the rest of the world except of the Americas by then. Bear in mind, Europe had for the previous 2,000 years gone through relatively regular waves of incredibly infectious and virulent diseases that decimated countries every couple of centuries, thanks to their trading ties to all corners of the world. But the first explorers and conquistadors did get sick quite often during the first centuries. Europe had a particularly high burden of infectious disease due to far more densely populated cities and the persistent presence of livestock over the preceding 12,000 years or so. There are certainly also trends attributable to climatological differences, but livestock and population density are the two major ones. All of the common livestock animals, including horses, donkeys, mules, pigs, cattle, sheep, goats, chickens, etc., are not native to the Americas, and thus the human populations who spent at least 20,000 years adapting their immunology to the ecology of the Americas had no preparation for exposure to European microbes. Watch Why Is There No America Pox from CGP Grey. It's a great video. Of course, it's broken down to be pretty simple and touches the problem only on a surface level, so the standard watcher can comprehend the topic in 15 minutes, but it does a GRWT job in what it wants to achieve. Side note: Europeans died like flies when they first tried to enter the interior of Africa. That's what made Africans such awesome slaves in New World tropical plantations. Disease resistance. I can exactly describe it as being grateful for malaria, but it stopped what happened to the indigenous people of the New World and Australia from happening to my ancestors. Due to animal agriculture being common in the Old World, as well as trade routes connecting Africa, Europe, and Asia, by the 15th century Europeans had exposure and antibodies to a wide range of diseases. Such networks did not exist in the Americas, so the natives had much fewer defenses against disease. Also, there were American diseases. Syphilis is believed to have come from the Americas, which ravaged Europe during that period of history. They did, but you have to remember that at the point of first contact with the New World, Europeans had already survived the Black Plague, making them a population of high immunity survivors who lived often in poorly sanitized early cities. That means lots of people with diseases they aren't dying of, acting as hosts and carriers. The confluence of timing and technology made Europeans of the age an unintentional bioweapon. Europeans had domesticated animals, whereas the Native Americans had not. That's where most of the disease came from. Those paintings you see of Native Americans riding horses? That domestication of horses was happening alongside them dying en masse to disease. Not prior. European and Africans and Asians had been practicing animal husbandry for millennia, while Native Americans never did. The only domesticated animals throughout the Americas were dogs, which migrated with humans across the land bridge. So Europeans, who had been living with the pigs and goats, developed antibodies which made them immune to various animal-borne microbes that were lethal to Native Americans. Do you know when the first case of syphilis was recorded in Europe? The answer is 1492, and that's not a coincidence. It traveled back from North America to Spain on Columbus ships and proceeded to kill millions of people all over the world. But it's homegrown right here in America. Also, you're underestimating the number killed by smallpox. It didn't kill tens of thousands of indigenous Americans. It killed like 100 million of them. Because Europeans were plague rats thanks to their domestication of dozens of animal species. All those zoonotic diseases, smallpox, influenza, Black Death, typhus, polio, etc. started in wild animal species and eventually migrated to humans after we domesticated them until they became endemic. Think of all the diseases present in poultry, cows, pigs, goats, cats, dogs, horses, and how a chunk of them eventually migrated to us. As far as I know, in the Americas, the only domesticated animals were llamas, alpacas and vicuñas. Because plagues jumped the species barrier from livestock and Native Americans had relatively few livestock without much species diversity, so they didn't have many highly communicable diseases to give Europeans, whereas Europeans had livestock-derived contagious diseases from dozens of species across most of the planet. Also, tens of thousands. Add some zeros. Rat, mice, fleas, etc. infestation common in Europe and source of many diseases. So was close quarters with domestic animals. Mass die-offs in Europe had already happened. Americas were a much cleaner, healthier environment. I would like to just put out the fact that European settlers that brought over smallpox didn't just bring it over. They quite literally sent to at least 1 or 2 tribes a box with a smallpox pustule inside. So, it was kinda impossible for smallpox at least to not to spread rampantly in indigenous communities. That combined with the virgin soil theory made it a huge problem for them. One of the biggest reasons why Europeans were not affected by diseases in the New World is due to population density along with livestock and how close Native Americans were with livestock. Prior to Europeans coming to the New World, there was not any livestock to speak of in NA. Any livestock there was would have been alpacas. Most of the diseases you are referring to would have been closely related to humans being in close proximity not only to one another but also animals. Native people were killed by the tens of thousands from European disease. Try millions, bub. European bugs did the dirty work of killing off millions of natives, and Europeans killed off mostly what remained through continued violence until it resulted in US forces putting native people in concentration camps, CA reservations. Like I don't have anything to back this up or anything, but the direction of travel, far more Europeans went to the Americas than Native Americans traveling to Europe. A lot of European colonists did die from American diseases. In the Americas, New World diseases or tropical diseases didn't have the right conditions to spread in Europe. Diseases like malaria or dengue killed Europeans, but in the Americas or tropical regions Europeans traveled to. Since Europe didn't have the necessary vectors, such diseases didn't spread. Simply put, Eurasian immune systems are stronger than the ones found in the Native Americans both in the North and South. Not as strong as Africans, however. It's why there were barely any inland colonies in Africa. All colonial settlements were on the coasts and settler rotation was used quite a bit. Even the slave trade was impacted as local peoples would bring their captured enemies to the coast to sell them, as Europeans couldn't really survive inland campaigns. Colonialists actually frequently died due to disease in the colonized. Then the imperial corps is able to send more colonizers. Maybe the governor of Virginia just died from disease in 1655, but the king just appoints a new one and there is still a governor of Virginia in 1656. Ever heard of syphilis? The disease originating from llamas? Europeans got it all right. Also, do you realize that Europeans brought their diseases straight to the natives' homes, while whichever diseases they would contract were over ending in a recovery or, well, death before they could return and introduce them to the rest of Europe? One key factor is that Europeans' immune system had been prepped to fight viral disease as well as having a social understanding of how to fight it because viral diseases had already wreaked havoc in their cities. Indigenous Americans' immune system was more geared toward fighting bacterial disease and hadn't really dealt with viral. They were not prepped to quarantine, which was a known practice in Europe due to plague, or how to handle the dead from viral disease which can still spread. This was a key factor which made the exchange of disease so asymmetric.